Hi, I'm Adriana Espinosa, and I'm going to talk about interlanguage. Interlanguage is the construction of a unique linguistic system between both L1 and L2 of the learner. Interlanguage has 6 important premises. The first one says that the learner constructs an abstract linguistic rules that might not be understandable at the beginning. The learner's grammar is permeable and transitional. Permeable because it can be influenced by L1 or L2, and transitional because it can be improved or changed over time. For number 4, we have that this system has different variable rules, which means that in performance, it can vary their speaking and their writing. And the next premise says that the learner uses different learner strategies to perform with the language. And the last premise says that the learner's grammar is likely to fossilize, which means that it does not improve, it cannot improve over time. Here I have the 3 important aspects of interlanguage. I'm going to start with the discourse aspects. Discourse refers to the unit of language that is longer than a sentence. So, what are those discourse rules? Discourse rules are the way in which native speakers hold conversation, on how they expect you to react and answer to different questions and interaction. And then we have the role of input and interaction. For both, we can see different modification. For example, for input, we know something called foreigner talk, which is the language that the native speakers use to address non-native speakers, that can be ungrammatical or grammatical. Then we have interaction modification, that it's the way the learner reacts to different situations and utterances that they might not understand. The first one is when they pretend that they understand, and the second one is when they negotiate meaning, which means that they ask for repetition, they ask for clarification, which is the more productive one. And interaction in general is very important because here we have different teaching strategies that comes with this. And one of that is scaffolding, which says that the teacher can provide support to the student as they learn new concepts. Another one important aspect is the role of output, which was stated by Marilyn Swain. She said that the comprehensible output is also important in L2 acquisition. And here we have 3 ways in which we can learn through our own output. Consciousness raising, to know when we notice certain gaps in our learner. Test hypothesis, when we try to use different or new rules to see if we do it correctly or not. And the last one, to talk about our own output. Now let's talk about psycholinguistic aspects. In this one, we have to talk about how L1 influenced the acquisition of L2. It can be positive transfer, and it can also be a negative transfer. The consequence of a negative transfer can be reflected in the underproduction of the learner, the overproduction of certain structures, the production of errors and misinterpretations. And the role of consciousness is also very important. Richard Smith has said before that consciousness is about noticing, and consciousness can be intentionally, it can be as attention. Intentionally, when the learner actively wants to learn and learns, and as attention is when the learners use more their experience to learn. Then we have the processing operation. In this one, we know how the learner use different strategies to understand. Maybe they use a lot of pauses to understand, and maybe they try to avoid interruptions. Then we have processing constraint, in which the learner can see how they move to another level, or if they just don't move to another level of the language and they just are stuck and develop a simple version of the language. And last one, the communication strategies. There are certain learners that avoid problematic items. For example, when they don't know how to say disappointing, they might just say, I didn't like. And when they don't know a word, for example, toothpaste, they just say something similar like tooth cream or teeth cleaner. now we can talk about linguistics aspects, and most of them are actually related with the universal grammar, which is a theory proposed by Noam Chomsky, who said that everyone has an innate language system and it can be seen in different languages. So for the first one, typological universals, it answered the question what learners acquire first. There are different structures that are easier to acquire and harder to acquire. For the learnability, it actually talks about how children learn the L1, and not only from input because it's insufficient and it's not enough. So we have to use positive evidence and negative evidence. It can also be applied for L2 learners. We also can talk about the critical period hypothesis, which says that there are certain periods in life that in which it's easier to learn a language, for example, when we are children, than when we are adults. And the last one, the acceptance of universal grammar. So it says how the L2 learners can access this universal grammar to learn different languages. For example, if we have a complete access to the universal grammar, the language is very similar to our own. And if we don't have access, it means that language is very, very different. Partial access, when it's somewhat different and somewhat similar. And dual access is when we can understand and we can use both the universal grammar and also different learner strategies.
Next, we have the error and error analysis unit. In this unit, we will see the difference between mistake and error, and also we will see about the different stages we must follow when we're checking an error. So, let's begin. Error versus mistake. What's the difference? First, an error is a gap in the learner's knowledge. What it means? It means that the learner doesn't really know the correct form or structure. Now, mistake, it's a lapsus in the performance that occurs due to some particular circumstances in which the learner is unable to perform what he or she really knows about the language. Taking that into account, we can move on to the error stages. We have 4 error stages. The first one is identifying errors. In this stage, we compare the sentences the learner produces with the correct form that correspond with them in the target language. For example, in this, we have a man and a little boy was watching him. This is wrong. So what we're doing? We're identifying. The sentence would be a man and a little boy were watching him. Next, now that we have identified the error, we can move on to the second stage, which is describing errors. In this, we describe and classify the error into types. For this, we have so many ways to do this. However, first we will be classifying the error into a grammatical category. It means that we will be seeing if this error is a verb, a noun, a preposition, etc. And also the ways in which this error is different from the target language. It can be for omission, substitution, misordering, or addition. Omission happens when we leave out an item that is required in the sentence. Now, substitution is when we use a grammatical form instead of another grammatical form, which would be the correct. Then misordering, it refers to the order of the words. And addition is when we add something that is not really necessary to the utterance. Then we have stage number 3, explaining errors. For this, we focus on the different sources of the error. We have 2 possible options. First, negative transfer or interlingual transfer. In this, the L1 interferes and influences the error. Then we have, on the other hand, the overgeneralization or intralingual transfer. In this, the learners overgeneralize the forms they have learned and find easy to employ. Finally, we have stage number 4, the error evaluation. For this, we have also two possibilities. An error could be local or global. It can be local when it only affects a word in the sentence. For example, they gift a card. It's still comprehensible. However, in the global error, it violates the whole structure of the sentence, making it incomprehensible. For example, this. The policeman was in this corner whistle. It doesn't really make any sense. Now that we know all of these stages, we can move on to an example. Here we have, I have 20 years old. This sentence is clearly wrong and has an error. So what do? First, we identify the error. It's, I am 20 years old. Now that we have identified it, we move on to the describing stage. In this, we can say that we have a substitution of the verb have instead of the verb to be am. Now, explaining. This error is a negative transfer or interlingual transfer. It means that the L1 is interfering here. And finally, we have the evaluation part. We can say that this error is a local error because even though it's affecting just one word in the sentence, we can still comprehend the whole sentence.
Hello everyone, today we are going to talk about second language acquisition. Well, many people think that learning a language is just about building a wall brick by brick, but research shows that it is a much more complex, dynamic and systematic process. In this video, we will look at how learners move from silence to stabilization using key theories from Rod Ellis and Stephen Gordon. Let's start. Every learner starts somewhere, and that somewhere is often the silent period. In this pre-production stage, learners make no attempt to say anything while they process the new language. When they finally do start to speak, we see the early stages of speech production. This stage is characterized by two things: formulaic chunks and propositional simplifications. The first one, formulaic chunks, are fixed expressions like I don't know or how do you do that are learned as single units. Prepositional simplifications happens because full sentences are cognitively heavy, leading learners to leave words out, resulting in phrases like me no blue. As learners progress, they follow a very specific sequence when acquiring grammatical structures. Rod Ellis illustrated this using irregular past tense verbs like eat. Learners typically pass through 5 stages. First, they fail to mark the verb for the past at all, just saying it. In stage 2, they start producing the correct regular form ate. However, in stage 3, they begin to overgeneralize the regular ed rules from every verb, producing eat it. In the stage 4, involves hybrid forms like ate it. And finally, in stage 5, they return to the correct irregular form ate. U-shaped learning is a sequence that reveals a phenomenon called U-shaped. Initially, a learner seems highly accurate, saying ate. Then they apparently regress by making errors, saying eat it, before finally performing correctly again, saying ate. The same with the verb went. They start with went, they overgeneralize with goat, and they finally says went. But why does this happen? It's because of a process called restructuring. This occurs when learners reorganize their existing knowledge to accommodate new rules they have discovered, such as the regular ed past tense, that the regression to it is actually a sign of cognitive advancement. The learner is trying to integrate a complex system rather than just repeating memorized words. Finally, we look at Stephen Gordon's framework for how learners' language develops through 4 stages. The first one is random errors, pre-systematic. The learner is only vaguely aware of a system and makes inconsistent errors like John can't write. The second one is emergent. The learner begins to internalize rules but cannot correct errors, but if they are pointed out. The third one is systematic. The learner is more consistent and is now able to correct errors if someone identified them. And finally, stabilization or post-systematic. The learner has mastered the system and has the ability to self-correct their own speech. Well, to wrap up, SLA is not random. It is a systematic and universal process driven by internal cognitive mechanisms. Understanding these stages help us see that even when learners make errors, they are often on the verge of a major breakthrough.